Hey guys, and welcome back to a new video. In this video we will actually implement the functionality to be able to load photos from external storage, from shared storage, into our RecyclerView. And we're going to start here in our main activity, obviously. Everything will happen in here. And we will write a function to load these photos. It's a private suspend function again, and actually we should also make the other functions for saving and deleting images also suspend functions. I don't even know why I didn't do that, but I will do that here at the end of this video. So we can first focus on loading photos. Load photos from external storage. This will return a list of, how did I call it, shared storage photo. So this is actually just a data class here that contains an ID for each photo, which will come from MediaStore, which I talked a little bit about in the last video. What that is, we have a name, we have a width and height, and a content URI. So actually just the address where we can find that photo. And here we will return with context dispatches IO. Okay. How can we actually retrieve photos from external storage? As I said, we will again use MediaStore, which, if you don't know, is just a larger database of image metadata, and we can treat it exactly like a database. To actually retrieve these photos, we want to use our content resolver .query, and this function takes a bunch of parameters. The first parameter is the URI. So what kind of medium or volume do we actually want to query here? That is our external storage, so our external volume. And for that, I will actually create a variable called collection, and on SDK 29 and up, this will be MediaStore.images.media.getContentURI, and the volume name for that is MediaStore.volume external. So I think for saving photos we had external primary here, because for writing we only have access to that primary external volume on API level 29 and above. But for reading we can actually choose any volume, so we will just choose volume external, and if that is null, so if we're not on SDK 29 and up, if we're actually below that, we'll use MediaStore images media external content URI. And then we can pass that collection here for the first parameter in our query. The next argument this function takes is the projection. And all these terms just come from SQL. So projection is just which of the end results do we actually want to retrieve here, what are we interested in, so what kind of metadata. In our case we want to know the width and the height of an image, we want to know the ID, and we want to know the display name. So that is basically, if you're familiar with SQL, just what comes after select, so basically just the columns that we select in the MediaStore database. So for that I will pass projection here, which we will also create val projection, which will be an array of these single entries we can also get from MediaStore images media, for example, underscore ID, to get the specific ID for that particular image we're loading. Then let's duplicate that 3 more times, Control D. We want to also have the display name, the width, and the height. And obviously you have so much more here, like size, the title, resolution, the album. So just feel free to play around with that. I will leave it at these 4 columns. Then let's see what is next. Next is the selection. The selection is in SQL what comes after where. So basically what kind of entries do we want to select. I will leave this empty here. We just want to have all photos. But let's say you only want those photos that have a width of more than 500 pixels. You could specify that here in that selection clause, just in a typical SQL format. I'll leave it empty, so null. The selection arguments are just the arguments passed for that selection statement if you have one. So that would be those 500 pixels that will be inserted into that selection statement. Since we don't have a selection, I will also skip that. The sort order is, well, it defines how we want to sort the results that we query here. And just to show you how that would work, doesn't make that much sense in our case here. Let's just order our results by the display name. So we would say MediaStore, images, media, display name, and we want to sort that ascending. So it's exactly like in SQL. Then we can call !.use on that to get a reference to a cursor this time. What is a cursor? A cursor is basically just something we can use to iterate over the result set from that query. So all the images that fit our query, in our case just all images, and with this cursor we can then get access to the single columns and the values of those specific fields for a specific entry. And we can then use these fields to actually put these together into our own data class to just have our own representation of a photo saved in external storage. So first of all, once you get the column references for each column, so for the ID column we say cursor.get column index or throw, and we just say MediaStore images media underscore ID. So this is just something we need to do to retrieve that column, and with that column we can then retrieve the actual value of that specific entry. Let's duplicate that 3 more times for each column we have. Display name column. We have the width column and the height column. And also replace that here. Display name, width, and height. And then what we want to do is, now we want to iterate over that result set. We want to say while cursor.move to next. You can see that returns a boolean. So as long as there are actually next entries in our result set, we will actually move to the next entry. And for each entry, we can just handle that here in this while loop to get the ID using our cursor again, and .get long, because our ID is in long format. And now we simply pass our column index, so our ID column. Then we get the display name, and that is a string, so cursor get string. Display name column, val width, cursor dot get integer, width column, and for the height column. And what's missing here for our photo is actually the content URI for that photo, so how we can find it, because right now we only dealt with metadata here in MediaStore, and we haven't dealt with the actual data and the actual bytes for that photo yet, which we can only find using its URI. So we want to say that content URI is equal to content URIs dot with appended ID. So now we can actually pass a content URI here, which is our external content URI actually. So we want to get something, we want to get a content URI from external storage. What do we need to do? We had that here. This one basically. Oops. And then we need to pass the ID for the photo we want to get the URI from. And that is just our ID. And now with all these values, we can construct our shared storage photo. And to actually save all these, we need to just simply use a list. Let's initialize that above that query call. Val photos is equal to immutable list of shared storage photo. And then here in our while loop, we simply add a new photo, shared storage photo, and we pass our ID, display name, width, height, and content URI. And in our use function, the last line of that will just be returned here in this query statement and also in our with context block. So here we will just use our photos list and return that. And I think we need to convert it to a list. And here, in case that's null, we turn an empty list. And then the error is gone. So just a little recap. What happens here is we specify a collection. We want to query images from external storage. That is different for CK29 and up and below. Then we have a projection. Which columns of that database are we actually interested in? We have our list of photos we will populate here in that query call. We pass our parameters. We could potentially pass a selection to only query specific images. We don't do that here. We query all images. And with that cursor, we will just loop over all that result set and get the corresponding column values and just add these to our list. So that is it for this function. Let's actually set up our RecyclerView. Here we have that internal storage RecyclerView. Let's copy that function. Call it setup external storage RecyclerView. That will be RV public photos, our external storage photo adapter, and this will stay the same. And then we copy this function as well to load these photos into our RecyclerView. Load photos from external storage into RecyclerView. The photos will be loaded using our load photos from external storage function, and we submit that to our external storage photo adapter. And what we're now going to do is we will create something called a content observer, which is kind of live data for storage, for external storage. So this will just notify us about changes. So when we delete a photo, that we can actually update our RecyclerView and stuff like that. I will have a private latent variable here for the content observer of type content observer. And then I will create a function to initialize that. Init content observer, in which we set our content observer equal to object of type content observer. We don't want to have a handler here, but we want to override Control O this onChange function, which is called when the content actually changes here. And instead of this super here, we will just check if we actually granted read permissions, because only then we want to update our RecyclerView, just loading our images. And in that case, we call load photos from external storage into RecyclerView. That is already it for this onChange. We then can use our content resolver to actually register this content observer. We again pass a URI, so just our external URI, MediaStore, images, media, external content URI. For notify for descendants, I will pass true, so that means this content observer will also be triggered when some kind of descendants for our actual URI, so descendants of that URI will actually also change, then this observer will also trigger. And our observer itself is our content observer. Then we shouldn't forget to also unregister this observer in onDestroy. Let's do that at the very bottom. OnDestroy, and here we just say content resolver unregister content observer, and we pass our content observer. Scrolling up then to onCreate. Here we want to call setup external storage RecyclerView, init content observer, and somewhere we have that storage permission launcher. Do we have that? This one here. Here I actually want to check if we have read permissions, because then we just also want to call that load function, this one, and else we show a toast. Can't read files without permission, and make it a long toast. And that is actually it for loading photos. Let's next just change these things I talked about, that we use suspend functions for all of our functions basically. Save photo to external storage. Let's return with context dispatches IO and just put that in here and make that a suspend function. Then the error is gone. Here we remove the return statement, and that is basically it. Inappropriate blocking method call, which is now fine since we do that in a coroutine. Let's next do that for deleting from internal storage. Make that a suspend function. Dispatches IO like this. Here we already have that. And for saving to internal storage, we use a coroutine and make it a suspend function. Now we of course get some errors because we don't execute that in a coroutine. Now let's fix that. Here we will use lifecycle scope .launch. Put that in here. Oh, of course that doesn't work here because we have a when expression. Then let's not do it like this and instead put all this here in a coroutine. Yes, this as well. Toast.make text. Okay, now the context refers to the coroutine scope. Let's do that. This at main activity here as well. And I think one more error here. Is deletion successful? Let's also launch a coroutine here. Like this, and again replace it here. And we should actually put this above this, because I think otherwise, yeah, our adapter wouldn't be initialized. But apart from that, let's launch the app, check our emulator. Okay, let's make a photo. Okay, and oh, there are all of our photos. So it took some time to load them. Okay, because we don't initially load them right now. But after we made a photo, we actually changed MediaStore, so the content observer will trigger, and yeah, that's basically the reason. To fix that, we can simply go to our onCreate function, and down here, yeah, we do the same as for internal photos. We just also want to load the photos from external storage into RecyclerView. But apart from that, you can see all of our photos load, also those that I made with the camera. I mean the phone's camera, the other camera app. And if we just make some photos here, we can also rotate the device so we can see how that looks like in our RecyclerView. Do that. And yeah, obviously it doesn't display those now because that is still the version without this line of code. Let's run that app again, and then we should see that. So of course, because we had a screen rotation, then the activity will be destroyed and the photos won't be loaded again in our case, but now they do. Here's our photo in landscape mode. So that seems to work just fine. And then what is only missing here is what we do in the next video, the functionality to delete shared photos, external photos, which is also a little bit more complex because we need to handle it differently to delete photos from that we actually made. That is easy. And what is not so easy is deleting photos that we didn't make with this app, because that is considered as modification, and Scope Storage does not like modifications. So we actually need the user's approval for that deletion. And you will learn how to do that in the next video. Have an awesome day. I hope you like this video. If so, please give it a like and a comment. Bye bye.